Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of different things today. First, I'm going to, let me just fire up XAMPP here. Generally, that's the best thing. And I'm going to go here, start up MySQL, which is really MariaDB. And even before I, well, actually, tell you what, I mean, since we are going to use dbeaver, let me fire that up too. Oops. There we go. Okay, so while that's it's already up. Okay, so here's our database from before. You'll notice I do have some other things in here, but yours won't show that, and that's fine. And I do have the that first database that we had created previously, and there's the parrots table from the previous video, and we can see, there's the data there. I did do a little playing around with the species length and stuff, and kind of modified the stuff for cheeky, but yeah, that's basically the data. What I wanted to show you, even before we talk about all this, is there's actually another way of interacting with the database. Okay, and so going back over to the XAMPP control panel, I'm actually going to click the link for Apache. Okay, so I'll click Start, and that runs Apache. In case you've never heard of Apache, Apache is the most popular web server around. Okay, so this is an actual web server, and now it's running on my system, right? And you'll notice it says it's running on ports 80 and ports 443. That means, for instance, that if I went here and I did local host and put that in, yeah, there, Apache is in fact running, right? And the only reason that I see that is, again, if I stop this and now try to load up for local host, it says, yeah, I don't know what's going on, right? So localhost is basically just a shortcut for the current machine that you're on. Sometimes, depending on if you're on another operating system, you may need to do something like this, do the local loopback. Okay, but again, since I turned it off. Anyways, so once I run that, you'll notice, yes, we can in fact get that and so forth. But that's not really the part that I wanted to show you. What I wanted to show you is that, so XAMPP itself, the A stands for Apache, X basically meaning because essentially it could be, the software could be running on Linux, it could be running on Windows, etc. M is MySQL, well, these days MariaDB, and then we have the two P's. The first P actually stands for PHP, which is a web programming language. And in this class, we're not really going to talk about that. But the reason that it's relevant is because it comes installed with XAMPP and plays with Apache and MySQL and so forth. And what that does give us is the ability to do this. So here, if I go over to the admin button for MySQL, you'll see it'll actually open up localhost /phpMyAdmin. Okay, so phpMyAdmin, PHP has a very close relationship with MySQL and therefore MariaDB. And so what this is a web program written in PHP that allows us to another way of interacting and managing our database, right? So here's first database right here. Here's the parrots table, just like we've seen from there. Notice it's even actually showing me the SQL that we could type for getting those things. We can actually interact directly with this. So for instance, I could do a select star from parrots, and let's see, click go. And you'll see that, yes, there's the results of running that and so forth. Okay, so this is another way of interacting with your database backend, at least with a MySQL / MariaDB backend. If you're using another one, well, if later on we'll talk about, for instance, SQLite, and we'll talk about some other things there. Yeah, you may not actually be able to do that. Okay, now part of the reason that I bring this up is sort of the first thing that I want to talk about. Let's see. Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and change that. The first thing that I wanted to talk about today, really what I wanted to talk about was this idea of getting data in and out of the database in sort of helpful ways. Okay, so the whole thing with XAMPP is that basically, you know, wherever you're running XAMPP, that's where your data is stored. Now, if you happen to have kind of taken my advice and you're running it on a flash drive, then at least it's somewhat portable because you can sort of bring that with you. But sometimes you need to actually take your data out of your database to take it over to a different machine and so forth. And so we do need to talk about that, as well as you may need to sort of bulk add data into your database, or bulk create a whole database and tables and various things and so forth. So we do need to know how to do that. Now, the bad news is there's not really a standard SQL way of doing this. Usually we end up needing to rely on various tricks and so forth that are part of the particular database management system that we're using. Okay, and that's in fact what we're going to do here. Okay, so what I want to show you is, first of all, one way that I can get all of this data, and in fact, sort of all of the information about the first database dumped to a file that I could then somehow import later. Okay, so here in phpMyAdmin, you'll see we have the Export tab. Okay, so I can click on that. And then it kind of comes up with this bit of stuff here. Notice this initial stuff here we can just ignore. There aren't actually any default templates built in. That's fine. But we do have these two export methods, right? So notice one is quick and one is custom. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it on quick. Notice format. You can actually kind of specify a whole number of different formats to output and so forth. Okay, since of course a lot of this class is going to be about SQL. That's the one that I want to look at. Okay, so I'm going to go over here and say that I want to output for SQL, and then I'm just going to click Go, and basically it generates a SQL file. In this case, oops, actually, sorry, it just did it off of Parrots because I was running it on Parrots. Here, let me select first. There, now I've selected the database, not just the Parrots file. Now when I do export, it will give me the whole thing, right? So if I come here, yeah, there's first.sql. Okay, so it generates this file. It actually automatically downloads it. So because phpMyAdmin is a web app, and here's my downloads folder. Okay, so if I come here is first.sql. Okay, so let's take a look. Right, so that's what it looks like. Okay, now before you go running screaming, don't panic. A lot of this stuff is stuff that we can ignore. First of all, the double dash sign, that is just a comment in SQL, a way of doing a comment from that point to the end of the line. So all this stuff is just kind of there for someone reading about this and so forth. Then you see kind of all this other stuff that again, I mean, looks really cryptic and so forth. And a lot of this is specific to MySQL and MariaDB. Okay, but then as we move down, okay, so we see a comment. Yes, there's a database called first, and we see yes, it's going to create the table for us, right? So there that is, and basically there's the name. It's varchar. Notice it says that its default is null, so it's being a little wordier in those things. And then it actually has sort of the dumping of the table itself. Okay, it didn't actually in this case, in the quick case, create database tag or line for us, and I'll show you how to fix that. Okay, so another way of dealing with this. Yes, we'll come back to that. All right, so another way of doing this is, instead of using the quick, you can do the custom version. Okay, so now the custom version, what that's going to do is it's going to give you control over all of the outputting stuff and so forth, right? So you'll notice it says, okay, what tables? I mean, in this case, I only have the Parrots table, but then we have various other things. Okay, so template name, it's basically going to base it off of the name of the database, in this case first. And then we have various things, right? So do you want to display those additional comments and so forth? We can have checkboxes for other things going on there. But then notice, come down here. So add statements, add a create database use statement. Oh yeah, that probably would be useful. I could add a drop table if I wanted that. I could even add an if not exists part that basically will, when it creates the table, it will add a little bit of information about if the table doesn't already exist, then create this, okay, and so forth. So you have a lot of control over exactly what this stuff is going to look like in terms of that output. Let me just show you this, right? So again, if I do go right, again, it named it first, but I still had that file sitting there in download. So now I have these two ones. Let me get rid of the quick version, if you will, and then we'll just kind of rename this, get that out of the way, just so we can take a look. So, there it is, again, very similar up there. Now notice though, right, so it has a create table with an if not exists. It has the use first, then goes on and so forth, okay? So this pretty much will create that whole database anew for us just by importing it into our MySQL database. Okay, and so let me show you this, right? So I could even do it. I can do it from here. I can come over to Maria database in dbeaver. I'm going to go to first, and I'm just going to delete that entire database, right? So it's gone. It's not in there. Let's see. So now if I come over to here, I should do a refresh. Yes, you'll notice it's totally gone. Okay, we no longer have that first database sitting in here and so forth. All right, so how do we import it? Again, we're going to rely on PHP MyAdmin for loading that up. And there's a couple of other ways of doing this. If you do some Googling online, you'll find some different command line foo that you can use and so forth. Again, this is kind of the easiest. All right, so I'll go ahead and do an import. Oops, you're right. I have not. Let's see if I can go back to here. Okay, databases, yes. And now I should be able to do an import. There we are. Okay, and it says give me the file. So I'm just going to navigate to my first.sql, like so. And right, so yeah, it kind of has this additional stuff and so forth. Yes, it is in SQL format. All right, let's give it a shot. Right, so I go ahead and do that. It says it's finished. It says it executed those things. I'm not really seeing any error stuff. Let's take a look, right? So we go to first, and there's parrots. There's all of our parrot data. So yes, it was in fact able to recreate the entire structure and so forth, right? And again, that's really, really helpful, right? It's really helpful for doing things like backups, for migrating stuff across machines, all of those kinds of things, okay? And so that is a skill that you do want to make sure that you're comfortable with and so forth. Now, the other thing, though, is sometimes you have a file. Actually, I see I had the link here. Honestly, I don't need that because I've kind of showed you how to do those. So let me get rid of that. And in fact, I don't even need this just up there still anymore, so I'll get rid of that one too. Okay. That's great if somebody already created a database for you and they're exporting it and giving you the SQL for sort of regenerating it in your database system, and assuming that the two can kind of talk with one another and so forth. Yeah, that's fantastic. The problem is that there's a lot of data out there that doesn't necessarily come in SQL form. Okay. One example, it is very, very common to use a file format called CSV, which stands for comma separated value files, right? In fact, I mean, you can Google this. CSV files. And it kind of shows about, right, here's the little Wikipedia page. Now, the thing about CSV files is there's not a lot of standardization. There's some things that are kind of commonly used and so forth that aren't technically part of the standard, and so sometimes they are certainly a little bit abused and so forth. But nevertheless, they're really, really common in terms of being able to exchange data. Okay, let me show you one. I'll show it to you here. I do have the link here to this one called Inster Classes, and so in Canvas you'll be able to access this. If you found us on the internet, I'll have the link in the show notes for where to get this. But basically, when I follow this link, it'll actually take me here to this gist, and here it shows what it actually does by default for a CSV file. Is it kind of shows this nice little tabular display. Okay, but let me just show you, right? So if I go to raw, this is literally what that file looks like, right? Or on my machine, because I already have this downloaded, if I go to, you'll notice I have, since I have Excel installed, by default Windows puts in that it could open up CSV files with Excel, but this isn't an Excel specific file. For instance, I can open it up in Notepad++, which is just a text editor, right? And there it is. Okay, so the whole point behind comma-separated files is that the fields are separated by commas, right? So the first field in this case is instructor name followed by course, right? And then I have here, an instructor, my last name, and a particular course that I'm teaching. This one here I have Professor Hidalgo and that her teaching that course. I have Professor Gasper teaching this course and the COP 2513, etc. Okay, so that's an example of a very, very, very simple CSV file, right? These can get kind of more complicated. They can get different, etc. Here's another one that we'll look at briefly. This one, notice 7 problems. Okay, so it's basically what I did is, there's this website with this kind of silly little list thing of 7 problems people who've killed before will understand, right? So we kind of have a number, we have kind of the main headline, and then we have this text here, right? Now, I mean, the thing is, again, what you should realize is that many websites are database backed. That is, their content themselves is actually generated from a database. Okay, so having something like this is certainly pretty common. That is, to be able to generate content dynamically from a database. Again, bit outside of what we're going to do in this particular class, but later on, if you take the web design or web development class, you'll see things like that as well. Okay, so here we have, here's the field, here's the sort of main header. In this one, I didn't put the names of the headers, so you can see by default, GitHub sort of assumes that this first line is actually sort of the names of each of the fields. But it turns out in this case it isn't, right? So if I go to raw, we can see. Now, here's what I would just want to point out with this, okay? If we take a look, right, so we see there's the number 1, then a comma, then we see a whole bunch of text, right, and then we see another comma, and then we see more text, but that text is actually inside double quotes. Okay, now I do have this downloaded here. 7 probs CSV, right? And again, I can sort of show the same sort of thing here. This is actually what that looks like and all. But what I do want to show you is what it looks like in Excel. Right. So the main thing that I wanted to point out is notice that here in the third column, I don't actually have that stuff inside double quotes. Okay. So what happened was, if you actually take a look at this whole text here, and maybe it's a little easier if we go over here, right? So you'll see in this entire part here is the last column, but the problem is, it contains a comma. It actually contains several commas. So those several commas would actually otherwise kind of throw off a CSV parser. Okay, now it is very commonly done, but not technically part of the standard, that in that case, what people will do is they'll use something like double quotes around that part to essentially let it know, to let whatever program is reading to know that, well, take this entire thing, all this stuff in double quotes as a single column. Okay, so again, some of the little differences that you see. And basically the way I actually generated this was what I did is I opened up Excel and then I sort of just typed in the things into the different columns in Excel. Then I just did a save as, made sure to select the CSV comma delimited format, and it actually was smart enough to put in the double quotes where they needed to be. Okay, so that's one such example. You'll notice here, this never have I ever part where they do actually have double quotes. Again, you kind of compare that to what that looks like in terms of the actual data file itself, right? So there it is. Okay, and there's how kind of that was done and so forth. Okay, so again, some little details that can sometimes throw you. Other common file formats there are, for instance, you'll see sometimes TSV or tab separated value files. Let me just show you, actually. I'll show you a couple of things. Here's some data. We'll probably look at, if not this particular data, we'll probably actually look at a variant of some of these things. Just to give you an idea, so one of my best friends, when I met her, she was a student of mine, and she told me actually her job was a data journalist. I had never heard of this before, and so I was really intrigued. I said, okay, so what exactly is a data journalist? And so she had gone to journalism school. She was actually working as a journalist, but her job was she would do things like make freedom of information requests and sunshine law requests to get governmental data, and then they would actually do various stories about these things, about the government and so forth. Really interesting kinds of things. So she gets a lot of things like in, for instance, CSV files. Here's another example of a CSV file. I don't even remember the exact link of where I got it, but I do just want to show you what this is. This is a categorization of URLs, right? So all the way at the end here is the particular URL, and then there's kind of guesses or saying, what roughly the category of URL that falls into and so forth. Okay, and so this is freely available data, etc. So this is the look of looking at the data through something like Excel. Again, typically when you first get the data, you're going to want to do a number of things. You're going to want to, certainly you might want to look at it in something like Notepad. Honestly, if it's a CSV, one of the first things I'll probably do is open it up in Excel, and then I'll try to figure out. But part of this is too. It's like figuring out kind of what false, finalized. I'm not quite sure. Right, there's lots of zeros and different things and stuff. So sometimes figuring out or finding out the code book for a particular file takes some additional work and so forth. So that's one thing you do. The other thing you also do is you kind of do some sanity checking as well. You're sort of looking to see if there's weird data or data that's going to cause a problem when you're doing an import. A really good example of this is just like the book was talking about in the past chapter when it was talking about allowing for or not allowing for nulls to be a value, right? So if you specify in your database, in your create database, that you're not allowing a certain field to be null, and the data that you're going to import actually is missing data, that's going to be a problem. Okay, and so you can get into kind of weird cases and so forth, and sometimes then you can either go back and change your database structure to allow nulls, or you can kind of come back in and in terms of how you're doing the import, you can kind of adjust things and so forth. But again, these are kinds of things that you look at and so forth. Later on, I'll show another tool that's oftentimes used to kind of get a better view of a large data set and so forth, to begin to start making sense of it. The point is that just because somebody gives you a data file, you don't need to take it at its face value, okay? You need to develop the skill. Right, this isn't just and this isn't just a data journalism skill or a data scientist skill. This is an IT skill as well. You need to be able to sort of look at the data and start asking questions like, does the data make sense? Later on, I'm going to give you a data file where certain values are clearly out of bounds, and so I'm going to expect you to be able to kind of go through and look and say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense for this field to kind of have that type of value and so forth. Okay, so you need to start kind of be thinking about those things, right? So here's, as I said, this is some publicly available data on URL categorization. The other one, this actually is this is data from the Pew Research Center, where they did a survey on privacy. Right. So, again, we're sort of looking at, okay, we got the case ID. Yeah, that's pretty common. I mean, to have an ID for a case. Weight, I have no idea. Right. And then notice these Q1, Q3s. So they seem to have numeric values, but then Q5's got a bunch of stuff sitting inside there. And, so maybe these are Likert style types of questions is what I would guess, the strongly like, etc. But then, we start to see like negative ones and stuff. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Again, we might have to look at something like a code book and so forth to try to figure out. Plus, we don't really know specifically, at least just by looking at this data, what each one of those Qs actually means. No, I'm not going to save that. And it turns out, actually, in this case, there is actually some stuff on the questionnaire and so forth to kind of help make that stuff make sense. Let me show you even further, right? So, again, here, my friend who was doing the data journalism work, she actually was kind enough to donate to me some data files that they had gotten through public records requests and Sunshine requests. So, for instance, here's a listing of all of the jail bookings in Broward County in some particular year, right? So I can open this up, and I just want to give you kind of an idea. Notice it's actually taking a little while to load, so this is probably a fairly large file. Hope I don't crash my computer while I'm doing this. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so, actually, maybe it isn't just for a particular year. So it seems there's a couple for 2009. Okay, there's some 2011s. Let me just go down. So this field, this particular file has 320,000 individual records in it. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of information here, right? And yeah, so we have we certainly have some column headers there, kind of that should make sense. DOB, probably date of birth, sex, etc. Right? Admit date, it looks like. So yeah, there's another release date, bond. Notice charges. So yeah, we do actually have this. This one actually isn't too bad in terms of being able to understand and so forth. But certainly is quite big. Let me just go back and kind of show you some of these other ones too. Sex offenders database. This one, they actually happen to have TSV, which stands for tab separated value. You'll notice if I try to open this directly, Windows doesn't seem to know what to do with it. It is in fact just a plain text file. The T, as I said, stands for tabs, and Excel will actually open this. So if I opened Excel and then said, open this file, it would figure out that the tabs are supposed to be separating files. So basically, between each column is a single tab character, and that's what's going on there, right? So this is showing addresses of various sex offenders. I believe in Actually, look like they're all over the place. There's some Orlando. Yes, this is probably all over Florida. So there's that sort of stuff as well. So there's a lot of data. We're going to actually look at some of these different data sets and so forth and talk about that. Here's some crash. Some stuff on crashes, so automobile crashes. Notice these actually say they're just plain text documents, but again, I mean, we can kind of take a look. Yeah, you know what? It says text file. It's actually a CSV, right? So there it is. You can see that it's being separated by commas. So again, looking at your data, looking at the file to see what is there and how you're then going to begin to play around with it is a skill that you're gonna want to develop, right? You get a data file, you want to start looking at that and so forth. All right. So back to our very, very simple CSV file, right? Instructor name, comma course. There's a few records. So, I could have done this with the Parrots database too if I wanted to. I just wanted to give you an example of a slightly different file. So let's look at playing around with this. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to come over here to dbeaver. Let me go ahead and I'll create a, create new database, and we'll just call this, you know what, I don't even care. I'll put it in this first database, that's fine. So what I want to do is come up to, and I'll do new SQL editor. All right. And so that created that for me, so I can say, let's see, use first. We'll just make sure that we are in fact using the database named first, and then I'll say create a table, and I don't know, let's just call this classes. How about this? Teaching. It's even better. All right. So looking at our data, right? Again, looking here, we can see basically we have two columns or two fields, right? We have one for the name of the instructor and one for the course. Okay. And again, I can come back over to come back over here to see that as well, right? So I'll try to give it some meaningful name. Let's say inster name, and I'm going to do a varchar, and let's see, so Ventura and Hidalgo, those seem to be the longest. I'm just going to kind of say, just sort of eyeball, say probably about 15 letters maximum. I know both of those are actually shorter than that. And then the other part is the course. Okay, so the course, we have the 4 numbers for the number. We have 3 letters plus a space, so 4 and 4 is 8. Then actually in terms of the Florida numbering system, sometimes you have 1 letter. I think there's even options where you'll have 2 letters following the course number. So what I'll just do is just say something like course, and again, that's going to be a varchar. So we say 8 plus another 2. Yeah, let's say 10. Okay. So there we go. We have we have, if I then run this, I should have my table. Yeah, my teaching table. There it is. Okay. So my teaching table exists, right? Now what I want to be able to do is to load this data into that table. Okay. So I have here a link to the MariaDB documentation page, right? And so if I click on that, it'll pop here. And again, if you're watching, if you found this on the internet, check the show notes. I'll have this posted there, right? So here's all the documentation files. Oh, they do actually have a search. Okay, that's cool. So I happen to know that that the particular command that I'm interested in is the load data infile command, right? And so here, this gives me the syntax for loading data loading data from basically some form of file. And I'm saying some form of file because the load data command that is part of MySQL and MariaDB is really, really powerful. It lets you basically tell it how the fields happen to be separated. Notice, so it says load data. The stuff in angle brackets is optional, right? So this and then when you have the OR bar, basically that is sort of make a choice from these two things. So I could have load data and then just not have this at all, or I could have load data and say low priority or concurrent, right? So that's what that is. So basically we'd have to say load data in file, then we have the file name in single quotes. Optionally, you can specify replace or ignore. You have to have into table in whatever table you're having. And then we have kind of this additional stuff, right? So notice fields terminated by or columns terminated by, also optionally enclosed by, escaped by, right? You can do other things like line starting by, and all kinds of good stuff in there. And you know, if you do Google searches for MySQL and load data from, you'll find a bunch of examples and so forth. Okay, I'm just gonna kind of barely, I'm just gonna scratch the surface of this for right now, to kind of give you an idea. Okay, so as I said, we want to say load data in file. And then I need basically the name of the file that I'm interested in. Okay, so I already have that download. It's in my downloads directory, and there it is, Inster classes. Okay, so I'm just going to go over here and copy the path to that file, and I'm going to paste that in, and then I will say Inster classes.csv. Okay, so right, load data. Again, I'm skipping all the optional bits. In file, whatever the file name is, right? I'm going to skip those optional bits. So then we want into table, whatever that happens to be. Boom. Okay, so the table, well, we decided to call our table teaching. So there it is. All right. Let's try it. Okay, it says some of this other stuff, it says actually all this other stuff is optional, so maybe I can just get away with that, right? Hopefully. So control enter, query execution failed. Okay, so let's see what reason. It's a SQL error, blah, 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 not found. Okay, so it looks like it's having issues finding my file. And actually just kind of looking at this, notice, so it says d:\\, all of that. But then as I look over here, I'm getting this weird thing where it seems to have missed my backslashes. Okay, now this is really, really subtle. And you'd probably not notice this unless you've done programming in some other languages, right? Basically what's happening is typically in strings in programming languages, a backslash is a special character. It's known as the escape character. So what we're actually saying is this doesn't say d:\u. What it actually says is d:, and then whatever the special character \u is, which actually there isn't such one. So it's just kind of, it ends up throwing out those backslashes. One way of fixing this is you escape or backslash the backslashes, like so. Okay, so I can try that. I'll hit control and enter. Okay, and now it still fails, but notice I actually get a different error. Okay, so now it says data too long for column inster name at row 1. Okay, so it did actually, so we got past the first part, but not past something else. Okay. The other way you can actually fix this is you can use Linux or Unix style separators in here as well. Okay. And again, we still get the data too long for column part. Okay, so now we need to talk about that. All right, so let's see what we can just do here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna say, let me delete that teaching table, and I don't know, let me make this sort of insanely big just to kind of see what's going on, right? So I'll change that to be a much bigger column, and I'll have that table recreated. Come over here, do our F5. Yep, there it is. Okay, and good. Right? Again, yes, it failed, but notice, read the error. Okay, so now again, I'm getting a different error. Row 1 doesn't contain data for all columns, right? So here's actually what's going on. The problem is that it's trying. In fact, I'll show you. I think I can do that. Yeah, that's right. I forgot it doesn't kind of like that. Okay. Do it this way. Okay. Suppose we only had one column in the database, like so. And again, I'm going to go ahead and run this. Right, and there that is. And then let me go ahead and run our load data. Okay, notice, no errors. Awesome, seemed to work. Let's see what that gave us, right? So what we have is in the instr name field, the first thing is instructor name, comma course. Then in the second record, I have Ventura, comma C, right? So essentially what it's doing is it's taking the entire line's worth of data and using that as the value of what is now the only field in that table, okay? If we want it to separate it on commas, we're going to need to tell it to separate it on commas. Okay? All right, so let me Control Z, bring that back. All right, so there's that. Let me get rid of this. And once again, regenerate or recreate that table. Okay, so now my tables has both of those columns. Okay. Oh, and yeah, actually, let me change this back here. All right. So, yes, we have our two columns. Okay. So again, all else fails, go back to the documentation. I happen to know, having played around with these things, and of course Googling some other stuff and all that, we do want to. I'm going to use the fields option. Okay, so essentially what I'm going to do is just going to say fields are terminated by, and then I'm going to tell it that they are terminated by a comma, like so. Okay. So just this one little addition tells it, hey, look it, I'm dealing with a comma separated value file. Okay, now there are some provisos, for instance, that other stuff about dealing with the double quoted fields and stuff. You kind of have to play with this some more, but nevertheless, this should at least get us to be able to import this. So let me go ahead and run it. And no errors. It does say that it created 4 rows. That sounds promising. Let me go ahead and double click here. And yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, so I do happen to have, right, so I did get Ventura, Hidalgo, and Gasper. Unfortunately, I happen to have this first record that really actually is the column names themselves. Okay. Now, as an exercise in your next assignment, for extra credit, you're going to have to figure out how to adjust the load data command to be able to remove that. But so I won't show that here. But what I will show actually is one kind of little kludgy workaround to that. Okay, so the alternative way is to do this. You just cheat. You get rid of the headers in the source file, right? For the extra credit, the headers have to be in the source file, just in case you're thinking you can get around that way. Anyways, all right, so let me go ahead and do that. I'll just delete the whole table, recreate it, and so now you notice, yes, we updated 3 rows. There's only 3 rows in the CSV, and again, we can see that, yeah, now, right, so we now have 1 row. The first row is a proper row with an actual instructor and an actual course, etc. Okay, so kind of a bunch of stuff there. But nevertheless, I think, if you kind of follow through and go through, hopefully that should get you on your way. If you have questions during the class, shoot them up to Piazza. If you found us on the internet, just give us some stuff in the comments below.